hope your microphone's sanitized.
I'm not as confident about that. I can't make any promises.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to use that
I think the show started.
mic. Is it?
Yeah,
Oh,
I think we're live. This is Freightonomics, folks.
Freightonomics. What do we do at Freightonomics, Anthony?
We bring freight and economics together. It's really a wonderful pairing. Is that?
Yeah, freight and economics.
Yeah,
I mean,
on surface, it doesn't sound too entertaining, but trust me, give it a chance, guys.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that we do here is we try to combine the global view, then the domestic view, and we try to distill it down into something that somebody that's sitting behind a desk in Chattanooga, Tennessee, with a limited view or scope of, the rest of the world, and we try to make it into something that, you can relate to, and also something that's actionable that you can understand, that relates to how the global economy, world economy is actually moving right now.
Yeah.
And what's moving the global economy right now, Anthony?
What's moving around the global economy is more like it. And
Yeah.
it's something called the coronavirus.
Yeah, so the title of this episode is Every Day's a New Day.
True.
And I think that's kind of the state of the world at this point, as we're constantly trying to figure out, what's happening right now, and as it relates to the coronavirus, what does that mean for me personally? Yeah. What does that mean for my business? How do I react to it? There are just there's so much activity right now. I remember just over a short month ago, in February, we were talking about how flat everything was. Man,
I remember that.
I don't.
I remember that.
That seems like 10 years ago to me.
Yeah.
So we've had a lot of changes over the last 30 days or so. We are now in a new quarter. We closed out the month of March yesterday.
What a month.
Yeah. March was man, I don't know if I can handle 9 more of those.
I mean, we're almost there, right?
A month at a time at this point. But the good news is that the coronavirus is supposed to supposedly, again, every day's a new day.
It is.
We're all learning here. Supposedly by the end of the month of April, we will have seen the peak of the coronavirus. Hopefully we will have figured out a way to mitigate it. But we did get some disturbing news today. Not that I think that this was really that shocking, Anthony, but we got some disturbing news that China may have not been completely honest, and I know that's going to come as a shock to you, right?
I feel like we spoke about this a few weeks back, that these might not be the official numbers, and to take it with a bucket of salt.
Yeah, a bucket of salt, correct.
Yeah.
I don't think this really, especially as our numbers in the United States have grown, we have swelled and surpassed China significantly, but also countries like Italy with far less people. And again, this virus originated in China.
Yeah.
So they technically should have had the brunt of this. Also the most populous country in the world.
Yeah.
They should have felt the full brunt of this because they weren't aware of it. They didn't see it coming. Countries like Italy, United States, at least had a little bit of warning.
Yeah.
So the fact that they're reporting less cases than New York City at this point,
very telling,
makes us all think, me and Mike Vincent were having this discussion this morning. Mm-hmm. Michael Vincent, who you'll know from Freight Forecasting and various other quick casts.
The dude.
LinkedIn, the dude. He's also on What the Truck now with Dooner. We were having this discussion this morning about how you just look at any of those maps that they're putting out right now, showing the world cases and the stats of all the countries, and you just almost automatically know, oh yeah, no, China, you didn't do that.
Yeah, and I mean, for sure China, but I don't think they're alone in being the only ones that are potentially fudging their numbers. I mean, who knows? Do we trust Russia's numbers?
Yeah.
I don't know. Do we?
It's one of those things that I think here we're going to look back in a few years and actually see a better picture of what's going on. But as it pertains to China, the reason that that's important is that China has a lot to do with the global economy, the U.S. economy, and subsequently the freight market in the United States.
You don't say.
Yep. So we're watching, we've watched, custom shipments, imports coming in from China. It's kind of a barometer of how people are expecting the economy to move. It's probably a little bit better than the stock market.
Yeah.
because this is action. This is what, companies like Macy's, JCPenney, Banana Republic, name a retail outlet, they're going to put in their orders to get ready for next fall today.
Yeah.
And here in the next few months, they get ready for their seasonal items months in advance. This doesn't just happen overnight.
Right.
Because it takes them, obviously it takes a couple of weeks to get those shipments in from China, but it also takes them a lot of time to just set these processes up in Asia or wherever it is they're making their products. So it doesn't just turn on overnight. The supply chain isn't made or changed in a day. I think we've talked about that before.
Right.
So these are good barometers for how we can anticipate the coming months to look like. And imports and volumes, and right now it's a little bit too early to tell, what the full impact is, but we're roughly 50 to 56% below where we were during a similar period in 2019.
Yeah.
So that's a little telling in the way that the coronavirus has shut down China. We should, here in the next 10 days to 17 days, looking at historical trends, know whether or not this recovery is going to be, on track or not.
Yeah.
Supposedly China has already neutralized their coronavirus spread. They're not reporting very many new cases. I think in the last 2 weeks, they've only reported maybe 1,000 new cases in 2 weeks, and the majority of those were in the front end of that. So, so they're not. We'll find out. Is all I'm saying.
I mean, we will. Also, knowing that the numbers are probably fudged a little bit with the initial outbreaks, it kind of lends to like what the current numbers and like if it is slowing, why is it slowing? What methods were put in place for it to slow? What are they doing in China that we are, we don't know what's going on, and so. I mean,
well, they've kicked all the reporters out of the country. All foreign personnel are now kicked out of China effectively. So our visibility is very low into what they're doing over there. They could have massive pandemic, but at the same time, we're talking about a country that isn't above just sending everybody back to work, back to the factories, and just risking it.
Or just really doing some next level quarantine for those that are infected.
Yeah. They could go both directions here.
Yeah.
They definitely have.
I mean, they have ghost cities and highways to nowhere.
Yes.
So they have the real estate. Also, quick note, we are live on our streaming platforms. So I will be, if you see me looking down at my laptop, I'm not ignoring you or the show. I'm ignoring Zach. And I'm looking at the comments here on LinkedIn. We have Henry Byers already jumped in. He already said Zach, and Anthony, our genius, says he's too kind.
Oh, look at him. Well, he's really smart himself since he's recognized one of us accurately. On the other half, I don't know. It takes
smarts to recognize smarts. I see. Of course, we have Antonio Serena. He said Corona time. I agree. David Morales. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Good afternoon, David. So we are monitoring. So jump in on the conversation throughout the podcast, throughout the stream, and be a part of the show.
Yeah. Certainly, this is we're all learning every day here, which is why the title of the show is "Every Day's a New Day." And I just wanted to cover that aspect of things as information is flooding in. This is how it works anytime you're learning, Anthony. Yeah. You basically have a new environment to evaluate constantly. We're not used to this set of circumstances. The psychological impact on the country cannot be overstated in this situation. I was a psychology minor. I don't know if you know that.
No.
Yeah, I was. I found it fascinating. But times like this are very important to understand the psychology of the environment, because whether or not it's accurate, it is.
It is.
It is. So
that's deep. I was almost a philosophy major, and it is a very powerful statement.
Yeah, no, it is. So our reaction to what we perceive dictates our truth or our reality.
Yeah.
And that's not just some, crazy philosophical statement. It's just the fact that we kind of influence our environment with our emotions, as you obviously state every week. And I argue with you because it shouldn't be like that, but it is to an extent. And the things that we're monitoring right now are hopefully more hard-coded in reality. Action. I like to always look at action. You can concern yourself with feelings as much as you want.
It's a fine balance.
Yeah. So let's go over a little bit about what our show today is going to be about. So I think the biggest story in the economic sector is the fact that the jobless claims are just through the roof.
Yeah, that was a pretty sharp.
Have you ever? I mean, there's never been a jobless claim spike like that in history, correct?
Correct. That was the most drastic. I mean, by a couple of multipliers. I mean, it was really out on a whole nother level when we see that. I mean, I think the next closest was
750,000.
Yeah, so it was like in a league of its own, essentially. So this was very telling to just really kind of drive home the fact on
3.28 million. Is that right?
Yeah.
So the next closest was 750,000, somewhere around there in 1982.
Yes,
is
correct.
That right?
Yeah.
So I think something to really discuss here this week is the fact that we're looking at jobless claims spiking, and it looks a lot more, and I found this interesting. A lot of people are using the term furlough, layoff.
Mm-hmm.
This implies a temporary situation to an extent. That the furlough obviously means that, hey, we can't support your salary right now. Go get unemployment benefits. The government's going to float you for the next period of time, however long this takes. Then when things start picking back up, we will bring you back on.
Right.
And that's being utilized quite a bit right now because companies simply have to.
Right.
There's no choice. Don't get too upset at the people that are giving you this information. They are literally just the messengers, and they're hoping for a much better outcome than this, obviously. But if you look at, I myself have spent a lot of time in the financial analysis realm and looking at the day-to-day operating incomes, operating revenues that you have to balance. They do the math on these things, and they're simply seeing we will go out of business if we do not do something to control our costs to this level.
Right.
It is not pleasant for anybody, obviously. Obviously, those there on the receiving end of that it's awful. This is your way of life. This is how you support your family, your kids, and all that. And that's this is why last week when I was on when we had our debate show, I was like, the government absolutely has to step in to do something to help mitigate this situation. If you're going to ask everybody to take a pause with their life, with their jobs, you cannot just let them float in the ether without anything to support them. You have not provided a solution. You are dramatically changing the infrastructure with which we are operating in, but you're only controlling one portion of the equation rather than the entire situation. So the government has stepped in with a stimulus bill. Anthony, have you read up on this? Have you given us what you think about what this might do to the overall economy?
Yeah, I mean, I've been briefed on it. I've read up on it. I didn't look over the entire thing because
that's
a huge document.
It would take me probably at least 20 minutes to read.
A few hundred pages.
I mean, 20 days. Sorry. 20 minutes, days.
What is time nowadays?
Yeah.
We have all the kinds of time. But yeah, I mean, it was a pretty aggressive stimulus. I mean, it's roughly 10% of U.S. GDP. I have some notes here.
10% of U.S. GDP.
I mean, looking at a roughly $2.2 trillion that's been enacted. And I mean, there's a few core components to it. I mean, I have some notes. One-time direct payment to individuals and families making below a certain threshold.
Right.
A boost in unemployment insurance. $350 billion in forgivable small business administration. Those are SBA loans to businesses that agree not to lay off any employees, and additional healthcare resources.
Now wait, let's pause right there real quickly.
Yeah.
Like this one's the most fascinating aspect to me. So there is a line in there that states that for employers that do not lay off employees, don't they have to maintain like the same employment level that they were like last Q2 or Q3 or something like that?
Yeah.
And then what do they get in response to this?
So they get forgivable small business loans, and they have to make that agreement, and they get additional healthcare resources.
Okay, so they basically get free healthcare and free money.
Right. Right.
To what extent it's not well defined, or
Yeah, it's a huge document, not well defined up front. We do know for those that are fully laid off there, I mean, I am happy to see that there are additional unemployment resources put in place beyond that initial one-time payment, so that, like I mentioned, that has a threshold on it. So individuals who make less than, I think it's 75,000, and families that make less than 150 thousand household income would receive that one-time payment of $1,200 plus another $500 for each child. So that's nice to kind of just jumpstart things. But the thing that I'm going to be looking at for those that have lost their jobs is going to be the individuals who have lost their jobs will receive an extra $600 per month for up to 4 months, and the duration of the claims benefits was extended by 13 weeks. So the reoccurring, I think, stream is really, I think it was going to be more impactful for people to be able to plot out and really kind of maintain themselves. Because as you mentioned, if we're asking the people of America to essentially hit the pause button, right. for roughly a month or so, and we don't want them to go into debt. We don't want them to go without, go into some kind of starvation mode. We don't want them to go into destitute, being homeless on the street. It's only right if we shut down the economy to hit that pause button and let them come out on the other side, roughly where they were, where this whole thing kind of kicked off.
Yeah, and I think that there is definitely value in kind of, at least I'm going to use the term soft landing, but this is not a soft landing. This is simply just trying to stop loss.
Yeah.
You're basically trying to cut off, how far down you go so that the recovery isn't as, long. We're looking at, imports coming into the United States right now. Custom shipments just dropped off and hit a floor. Now, if we were to floor that out earlier, the recovery period would not be as long or as volatile. So that's simply the way that I look at this, is that we are effectively trying to make sure that the recovery period is, one, as short as it can be,
right.
And also as quick, to recover as it can be. You're trying to just spur this on. We're still going to be shut down in the United States probably through the end of April at this point. A lot of this, though, like I said before, with supply chains, they do not change overnight. So for those out there that are doing brokerage, carriers, of course our shippers out there who are actively monitoring their own situations on the retail and food service, all these different industries, and the thing that we have to monitor at this point is, how are these supply chains reacting? Is China active right now? How active is China? The factory is able to produce at 100% volume. Then you have the demand side.
Yeah.
How active are the consumers in America? How active are the consumers in other parts of the world? This is all a very interconnected space now. So, knowing that we're going to have these weird little instances of imbalanced supply-demand. We're right now, obviously, just to make an example, medical supplies, high demand.
Right.
I wrote an article over the weekend involving the air cargo industry with the help of our air cargo editor, Eric Kulich. Thank you, Eric, for all your help. I am no air cargo expert, but he also, he was explaining to me how there were, these pharmaceutical providers over in China. Now, they were using these pharmaceutical companies in China while they were trying to handle their own situation, cutting off the supply to the United States where the virus had not hit yet. So they kind of rerouted their supply chain to service that sector a little bit better, as they should. Now that the United States is the one that needs it, they're having to redirect all that supply back out of China into the United States. But at the same time, they've shut down all these airlines.
Yeah.
50% of the air cargo capacity is derived from passenger flights, not cargo flights like the FedEx and UPS controls the majority of that. DHL, of course, a big player as well. So you're cutting off 50% of the capacity because passenger demand is way down, obviously, and a lot of that is mandated. And then you're going to surge one of the 3 to 4 main products that come over from China or use air cargo because it is a high value item, pharmaceuticals, medical supplies, etc. And now you actually need them expeditiously.
Yeah.
So you're going to need them faster, and now you have half the capacity.
Right.
So that's going to inflate rates coming across the ocean on the air cargo, but you don't have the capacity for it. So what do you do? I mean, it's and I think a lot of people are. I mean, the airlines themselves have not. They're not being like, oh yay, we can increase rates. I mean, to the extent they have to increase rates.
Right.
Because they're losing much more revenue on the passenger side than they are going to gain by increasing their rates 50 to 60% on the air cargo side.
Correct.
So this is the type of environment we're going to live in for the next several months. And some of these government stimulus packages are going to help soften the blow to that extent. It's going to keep more factories online. It's going to keep more people employed.
Yeah.
It's going to keep those that are unemployed more active in the economy. So it's going to keep that demand side a little more active than they would have been without that support.
Right.
Obviously, people can't go out and buy $1,000 phones in this environment, or they shouldn't. They probably will.
Definitely. Did you see the new LG phone?
Yeah.
Android guy here. I mean.
All right. Anyway, I'm not going to get into a dad lecture. But that's all going to help us kind of pull out of this, hopefully faster and sooner rather than later. So please continue with your evaluation of the stimulus package. I don't think you were quite done. Were you?
Yeah, I mean, so I think when we're looking at the stimulus package, as I mentioned, I think my last point was like the big thing is that we're looking at that long-term view, that additional bump and that sustainability, because if we're just having one big check sent out, that's not going to help a lot of folks. I mean, the other thing to keep in mind is that it going to the individuals that really need it. And so I know there's probably going to be a lot of inefficiencies, most likely.
Oh, what?
Yeah, believe it or not.
No way.
In getting it to all those individuals that were
some sort of super quick reaction to a global pandemic is going to have inefficiency in it?
Wild. I know.
My sarcasm button is red.
Wild. I know. So I think the other big part is majority of Americans, and I don't maybe not majority might be a stretch, but many Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And so their paycheck has essentially been interrupted over the last 2 to 3 weeks, potentially, a little bit longer if you're in certain regions of the country. And so because of that, they are living week to week, and so they're already behind, and they are in full-on panic mode. And so the fact that we are seeing that there are going to be adjustments and additional resources for individuals like that, that have maybe multiple jobs, they may be working 2 full-time roles, something like that, just to kind of keep lights on and food on the table. So those are the folks that are going to need it the most, because they would work if they could, but maybe they aren't able to. The other aspect is that when we were looking at those initial jobless claims and coming in throughout many of the states, my initial concern was these systems being overloaded, right? And so are these going to...
So the people that are basically taking the unemployment orders, can they process them fast enough?
Right.
Anybody in the unemployment office or the state departments that are issuing these checks, can they handle this mass amount of volume? It's kind of like our internet, that's now overloaded with Zoom and Google Hangouts calls.
Right. And I mean, it's insane to see how much things are really kind of being overloaded. The other big part of it was a $500 billion provision for large American corporations, with $425 billion from the Federal Reserve for loans to distressed companies, and $75 billion in direct aid for specifically hard-hit industries. And so this is going to cover industries like travel, leisure, and things like that. And that's really going to be impactful for those larger companies. And I mean, when I'm looking at it, I really want a lot of the support to, of course, go to those small businesses, because that's what really impacts many local economies.
Sure.
It's the large businesses that really kind of move the needle somewhat on when we're looking at GDP, but when we're looking at overall employment, a lot of that's going to be on the small business side, and that's really, I think, is going to be impactful for many consumers throughout the country.
So you're thinking that this is maybe a little bit too leaning towards the large businesses versus the small?
Somewhat,
Yeah.
but I get it, because if we're looking at GDP, okay, we got to make sure that the big businesses are still around, but I don't want fewer resources really being focused on the small business, because that's what's really going to be impacting most employed people, is going to be those small businesses.
Right, right. So yeah, that's big stuff. So, I don't know if this is going to be enough. I know there's already a fourth tier in the works here.
Right.
Is that accurate? And again, I'll back up a little bit before we get into that. But, for those carriers out there, a lot of you are small businesses. A lot of the brokerages are small businesses. So I know several of you out there have already experienced a lot of what this is, the furlough and the layoffs and things like that in anticipation, even though we're seeing some record-breaking numbers on the freight side, depending on the sector and the industry that you are in, obviously. Your food services, things like that are obviously doing, they're taxed at this point. I know Kroger is hiring thousands more people at this point, and Cisco is actually lending them employees to help keep their grocery warehouses stocked and efficient. So during this time period, but they're technically still Cisco employees. I read that article the other day, which is fascinating to me. This is all, I think that's a really positive thing in this environment, where we can kind of quickly devote resources into the areas that it needs. But we all have to consider that this is a very temporary situation. And, something that I also read the other day that I thought was an extremely pointed observation is that this unemployment curve, the way that jobless claims have spiked, looks a lot more like a natural disaster, such as a hurricane or some other, earthquake, some other temporary event that literally just wrecks an environment for a short period of time. The recovery periods are notoriously short in these situations, which, again, we're all hopeful that that's the case here. But typically what we see is these giant spikes have almost equal and opposite recovery periods.
Yeah.
So the shorter we can make this, the better. So everybody wash their hands, stay home.
Yeah.
But most economic recessions, and you can speak to this a little bit, Anthony, happen over a gradual course of time. That's several months of unemployment claims, several months of negative GDP growth that lead to a peak, and then it kind of gradually comes back down.
Yeah.
And we kind of hit this moment of inflection, and then we recover slowly, almost equal to the rate with which we were destabilized. Do you think that that's, again, seeing that this is not some event that's ever happened before? Normally those natural disasters are hurricanes, and they are very short-lived, and we know how to model those. This is a pandemic. We've never seen a model like this. How close to reality do you think that curve might fit, applying the hurricane logic to this environment?
Yeah, I think you touched on something there. When we're looking at typical recessions, usually we'll see that the path has been paved for that recession that we would currently go through, or previously go through, months, sometime even years down the line, or prior, before,
Right.
So we would see certain legislation, certain processes, unintended consequences a lot of the times that would happen, and that would lead into a recession months or years later. And so that's typically what we'd see. And then we would have some type of overcorrection and try to way to boost activity within the economy, and then that would be kind of seen as the thing that brought us out of recession. And so there's this whole pendulum cycle of reacting too late, overreacting, and not reacting enough. That's been the history throughout much of the modern times here. When we're looking at this, I think you're exactly spot on. When we're looking at it, say sudden spike, and a lot of times when we see sudden spikes in localized natural disasters and things like that, we see a sudden surge, and we see that resurgence. We see a nice, quick recovery. And so I do think that is a possibility here. We could see a more sudden recovery than something that would be long and drawn out. I think there's still going to be a long, drawn out process to get back to where we were previously, especially when we're looking at the psychology of it all. When we're looking at this, the psychology of potential buyers and consumers throughout the country feeling confident again. I wasn't going to go this long without mentioning consumer confidence. And
always got to plug those.
Got to plug it in. And so I think the big thing about that is going to be, is that going to outlive the actual the virus itself? But luckily, history has shown us that consumers have short memories. And so I think when we come out of this, the propensity to spend will probably be a little bit lower, right? So people that came up on this are probably, after we get on the other side, hey, I wasn't very prepped for this whole coronavirus thing. I didn't have enough savings.
It's like your kids. It's like your kids when they touch the stove.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, that was hot. The first time they touch it, they're like, oh, wow. I learned a lesson there.
Is that how it goes?
Yeah, my kids. Of course, my son might touch it twice.
Okay. You got to be sure. You got to make sure.
Yeah.
You got to, I got to make sure.
Yeah.
But I think when we're looking at consumers, look at all I'm not going to name any names, but Zach, I'm sure you've seen cases of, say, foodborne illness hits a few restaurants, right?
Right.
A few of the one chain, and people stop going, the stock drops, but you can't go out without your fill-in-the-blank food for too long.
Right.
2 weeks pass, 3 weeks pass. Next thing you know, you're filling it out, and you're right back in it. And so I think the consumer memories are low, or short for a certain extent. And so I think we'll start to see, maybe people are saving a little bit more, looking to prepare themselves a little bit more, maybe have a nest egg after we come out of this. But I don't think that's going to be a long-lasting trend when we're looking 2, 3, 4 years down the line.
So, by that logic, we're talking about once we're past the peak here, hopefully we're on the next month or so, say we're through this majority by the end of June, people start ramping back up. We're allowed to go out of our houses again because it's warm and gorgeous, and hopefully the sun and all its glorious UV rays destroy the coronavirus
hopefully,
and its entire memory from our banks, and we go out and we start spending a lot of money again.
Yeah.
So we could see a pretty quick recovery on that end, and hopefully that's the case. But something that is a little bit concerning here is the fact that even if we do see this best case scenario where, in May, we're starting to get back into our offices, restaurants can start opening again, we're sweeping off the cobwebs from all these empty buildings that have been this way for a little while. Obviously, this will not happen overnight. There'll be a gradually tiering in, I'm anticipating, of where certain places will start to open. People will be gradually allowed back into their, workspaces. The problem is that, like I said on the beginning of the show, a lot of these retails, like Gap and, Macy's and all that, they're canceling orders right now for the coming months. People are laying off people right now for the coming months. So we're basically setting ourselves up almost in a way. Again, I'm ignoring the potential impact of the stimulus package a little bit here, for a slower recovery because we are kind of reacting in the moment. Think about this. We've only had, in America, we've really only had, ignoring the overseas production capabilities and whatnot, we've only had 2 weeks of data.
Yeah.
2 to 3 weeks of data at this point. In my old job, there's absolutely no way that I'm projecting that into the future.
Right.
I might say this is starting to become a trend. This is a thing. Again, I'm kind of ignoring the fact that I know that this is going to be a blip or a one-time short-term blip. But, some of these companies out there that are applying some of these projections into the future, what's your advice to them at this point? How reactive should they be? Because I know I can't project anything. Me and Craig Fuller have had debates over how quickly we think that freight volumes are going to drop.
Right.
He thinks that by mid-April, we're going to be 10% lower than we were last year at that point in time. I said no. I think we're actually still going to be above where we were at that time last year. And the rate does somewhat support that right now, but we're very early on in this. We've just crossed the peak about a week ago in terms of freight volumes. and carriers are still relatively active, especially those in the consumer products and the food services side. They're still very active. We still have yet to see produce season. It has not turned on yet.
Yeah.
So there's still a lot of activity that we haven't recognized yet that I think is going to help prop those volumes up a little bit longer. And we do have the data to support that right now. The curve, as volumes were increasing, it was very fast. It was a high rate of increase. Now we've topped the mountain and we're coming down, but we're coming down at a slower rate than we increased.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what you would expect. Capacity has the exact same, or the exact opposite, I should say, the exact opposite thing occurring, where they were increasing slowly at first. It took them a minute for those volumes to kind of catch.
Yeah.
Then tender rejection rates went like this. They went vertical for about a week or two. And now they've actually reacted quicker after the peak, and actually they recognize about 7 days, or it was 6 days after the peak volume, tender rejections started to fall. And then once they recognized they were going to fall, they started dropping, like significantly, and the rate is a lot faster. So that makes sense to me intuitively. It takes a minute for people to get back into position, and volumes aren't just going to turn off overnight. Stores need to replenish their volumes.
Yeah.
So for those that are out there, trying to handle the near term with the long term in mind, what do you anticipate? Just let's just go out over 8 weeks. So through the end of May, we can throw out last year. and put that in the trash, light it on fire. It's totally irrelevant at this point. What do we think about the next 8 weeks? I'm laying off people. I don't lay off people. How quickly do you think the economy, assuming the virus is on its down slope here by the end of April?
Right. So I think when you're thinking about this, so this can go for a variety of industries because so many industries are being impacted. But when you look at this, I think it's going to be, first and foremost, you're going to have to find your baseline and how you can operate on minimal amounts of resources for the next few weeks. Next thing you have to do is just get more efficient, because if you're operating on that low of resources, you have to get more efficient. And so that's going to mean if you are going through layoffs, you have to combine or similar roles. You have to really streamline processes, really kind of forego certain opportunities that would kind of overextend your current resources, your current staff. This is also a good time to get creative. So you stick to your bread and butter, of course, but maybe start spinning off potential short-term ideas of all right, this is how we could potentially build on margins. So I think that's another thought process there for some businesses. This is also a time for strategic relationships building, strategic partnerships.
Yeah, absolutely.
So now you can start kind of reaching across the aisle, seeing that olive branch for some of those for hey, we're all going through this. Let's see how we could potentially merge our forces together and really kind of both come out on this on the same side. Another aspect is you have to maintain optimism. I'm not going to go throughout this and not talk about optimism.
Feelings.
And so
feelings alert.
You have to. So you have to lead with optimism. And that's going to really set the tone for your business. And when you are leading with optimism, that's going to change the work environment throughout these times. And so with that, you have to be able to see what's on the other side of this. And so when you're thinking about, okay, we're at a baseline, we can go forth like this with these resources for the next few weeks, you have to start thinking about what does the recovery look like.
Yeah.
And so you have to start thinking about, all right, 8 weeks from now, do I have bottlenecks in place? Am I going to be able to ramp up suddenly? Am I going to be able to really, not react too late after things kind of kick off? Can I react when things are actually happening off and popping off right now? And on that optimism note, other companies aren't going to be as optimistic. So this is also a time to look to expand market share when you can and however you can.
I think that's a huge, huge thing you just said right there.
Yeah.
Expanding market share right now. This is where environments are disrupted dramatically. So for the carriers and brokers out there, obviously the shippers know that they're going to have their opportunities. For people that have contracted too much, concerned with costs, and I went through this years ago in my old life, where you can cut yourself to death.
Yeah.
Preparing for the worst. You really have to have self-control, obviously within the boundaries of what your math supports. You can't just leave everybody working at full speed all the time, but you need to be My advice in this situation as a former financial analyst and pricing guy is you need to be ready to pounce when your opportunity is presented.
Yeah.
So if you cut yourself to the bare minimum, you will not be as effective if you are, if you at least leave a little bit of wiggle room there for when things turn on, because like we've been talking about, that faucet may turn on real fast.
Yeah, you have to be ready.
And you got to be ready for it. And it's going to take you a while to call those people back and say, hey, come back to work, set up this infrastructure again so you can have the bandwidth to help rebuild these supply chains, rebuild, all these relationships. I mean, again, the thing that I'm not going to get too feely here.
Got to.
But
Feel it, Zach.
the relationship building in this environment cannot be understated.
Right.
Your relationships with your providers and your vendors has to be a priority at this point. They are all going through the exact same thing. And this is where, again, you have to obviously respect the math and the finances of your environment. But I think that people can overcorrect, and you really need to check yourself when you're overcorrecting.
Right.
I've done it myself numerous times where I'm like, I'm going to prepare for the worst, and I totally jerk the steering wheel all the way to the right.
Yeah.
And it's a bad move, and I become less flexible, less capable of taking advantage of those opportunities. And again, since we are looking at an environment, I used to hate this, and I'm going to go against kind of my own personal philosophy because the world has changed.
Yes.
Looking at every day like a new day. You have to look at daily numbers, daily figures, because you're going to see these early warning signs, and you almost have to be overly sensitive to every upward movement in those signs. Again, we're looking at a downward trend right now. Obviously we have sonar and we can look at daily numbers, especially in freight volumes and capacity and whatnot. And that's the way I approach every day because that's my job, is I have to go in and say, okay, what does this look like today versus yesterday? It used to be week over week change, or month over month or year over year. Now it's day over day that I have to look at every single day to see the momentum of the market. How quickly is the market reacting? How slowly is it progressing?
Yeah.
The rates of change now become the most important factor versus the absolute figure.
Right.
Because all you're looking for is direction. You're looking for a change in momentum because that's going to happen a lot in different parts of the economy here over the next several months. Looking at daily figures, again, that whole paralysis by analysis thing, that's not a thing right now.
Yeah, you definitely need to look at day-to-day trends, and that's the thing, trends. And so you could see upward movement, downward movement, upward movement, downward movement. But what's the overall trend? Are things starting to tick up? All right, now we can start to see that there's a trend. And now if we're not just looking at one in particular, we have to look at multiple points, multiple sources, multiple views of the same industry to kind of see that things are turning around for a certain segment or not. And so I think that's a huge point right there, is that we need to look at trends within the same segment, same industry, but multiple trends moving in the same direction. Because if you're just looking at one, you're going to have that nearsighted, myopic view. Yeah,
and those of you involved in the supply chains right now, you are going to have bottlenecks galore as people are struggling to, once something turns on, all of this isn't going to turn off all at once. We're already watching that right now. I mean, obviously the retail, restaurant, travel sector are about as dormant as they can be. But there will be a time where that's not the case. This too will change.
Yeah.
But again, there's going to be things that we can't foresee right now. None of us here actually saw the coronavirus having this impact. I mean, I'm speaking for myself.
Yeah, speak for yourself, Zach.
I did not see this level of, contagion, reaction, whatever you want to call it, in this environment. But what I did is that since I look at my daily numbers, I saw it happening.
Something's not right.
And I knew immediately I needed to make a quick course correction.
Yeah.
And that's what everybody needs to keep in mind as we navigate the next couple of months.
Yeah. And so the other thing that you touched on, and I touched on briefly, was bottlenecks. And so some are going through bottlenecks right now, and there are definitely going to be a ton of bottlenecks when we get on the other side of this. So being able to refine your processes and your procedures when activity ticks up is going to be huge. So when we're looking to really capitalize on the other side of this thing, As I mentioned earlier, making strategic partnerships, strategic mergers and acquisitions, potentially for some individuals in some industries are going to be really huge and paramount right now. The other aspect is because we're leading with optimism. Other companies are not going to be leading with optimism. They're just going to, just throw it all to the wind. Like, no, it's all over. It's all going down in flames. And so you have to take advantage of that, unfortunately. And so those are the type of moves and mindsets that you have to kind of keep in your head, but really looking for those ways to kind of minimize any kind of potential losses. I'm a fan of stockpiling cash and making sure that you have cash on hand for, if you're a certain company that needs to kind of have that kind of leverage in order to kind of really optimize.
Well, the government ain't giving you any money to store it with them, so
no, not at all.
The interest rates are not exactly worth your time to save with.
No.
I think are we still negative on the 3 year or the 3 month?
I think that ticked back. Did it?
Okay,
tick
yeah,
back?
I think
I'm
it
not
came
sure.
back.
Yeah, but you really being able to have cash is going to be king, and that's going to be able to help you maneuver throughout certain scenarios.
It's going to enable your flexibility.
Definitely,
it's going to give you that leeway, which I think is a good point.
Yeah, being able to also reduce potential long-term commitment obligations for some individuals. Being able to kind of go back and maybe renegotiate some commitments, maybe you put some of those purchasing commitments off, pause it until things kind of start ramping back up, and you're really kind of moving through your backlog strategically, if you even have a backlog at this point.
Right.
So there's a lot of tidbits for a lot of individuals.
Yeah. So I'm gonna back into my pricing world hat. I'm gonna put on that for a minute, if you bear with me. A lot of the questions that we get here at FreightWaves are, what should carriers, brokers, shippers expect in terms of contracted rates? I think that's a very complicated question in this environment, and there's different opinions on this throughout. A lot of carriers, of course, are taking a very defensive approach to this environment, which I don't think is a bad move at all. But there's also some that are taking a very aggressive stance and saying, hey, this is a super volatile environment that we're entering, and we don't know what's going to happen here in the next few months. We're going to raise some rates just to account for that because we have to cover our costs. We can't handle going from 29% higher volumes to 15% lower volumes year over year in a matter of 4 weeks, which is what some are expecting, which we've already seen the first part of that. Which makes the argument for the carriers to take those rate increases. So, as a shipper, at this point, you definitely need to be aware that your carriers are about to weather a big brunt of the storm.
Yeah.
So you can't go in there and say, I need a 10% rate decrease, saying that, our volumes are X% lower, et cetera, and expect them to be able to actually service you.
Right.
This is going to be a temporary thing over the next several months. It's not a great relationship builder, but to the same extent, carriers and brokers can't go in and say, hey, we're going to raise your rates 10% because of this environment. You need to go in and do the actual math and figure out what's best for you depending on your industry, because again, industry and commodity at this point is extremely important. I believe I gave the advice, a few weeks ago about how target your commodities, those that are going to be extremely volatile, medical supplies, food and beverage. Yeah. You're going to have to devote more resources to that. That incurs more costs, et cetera. You need to account for that. I always wanted my costs to come in line with my pricing every single time, because over time, that's kind of that value investor in me. I want my value to be there all the time. So consistency in this environment is probably extremely valuable. Profiteering probably will not benefit you. In this environment, the carriers and brokers out there, you really need to focus on the fact that everybody is going through a wild swing of things right now. I would not recommend getting too aggressive. Don't go into that 20% margin range if unless you absolutely have to and you can justify it. Like, say you're having to deadhead 500 miles into Maine. That's obviously not a 20% margin in that instance anyway, but I think the point said is, in general, you need to be very conservative with the way that you deviate from your rates. I don't think this is the time for either carriers to lower aggressively or increase aggressively.
Right.
This is keep your level head about you.
Yeah.
And stay in that middle range. If you want to lower it a few percentages, I think that's safe. If you want to raise it a few percentage points, you have validity there. And the shippers should be willing to accept either one of these. Keeping rates more stable in this environment is a good thing. Use the spot market for those severe fluctuations.
Right.
That's what you should flood to in that environment. I know it's not stable, but your volumes aren't stable as a shipper, and your capacity isn't stable as a carrier.
Right.
So acknowledge that.
Yeah.
And the safest way to go about this is with a level head.
Are you talking about equilibrium?
Yes.
It always comes back to economics.
Yeah. and I mean, volatility breeds volatility, Anthony. I think that's kind of the point of the show is the quicker that everybody in this environment can control their own volatility, and those are those feelings that you like to talk about.
Yes.
Keep a level head about you, and you'll be able to weather this storm a lot more efficiently than others. Don't cut all the way to the bone.
Yeah.
Don't get too excited when you have your opportunity.
Right.
Just maintain a nice course, and you have to be able to adapt to day-to-day movements.
That's huge, being able to adapt, because adaptation isn't mandatory.
No.
It's a choice. You don't have to adapt.
Yeah.
You don't have to. Dinosaurs didn't adapt. And there's also a meteor, but I'm just saying, adaptation isn't mandatory, and so you have to be willing to change how things really kind of ebb and flow throughout the market.
So I forgot to go back to this there in the middle. I kind of talked over it, but do you think that, there's on this table the next stimulus package, number 4? Do you think that we're going to have one, and do you think it's necessary, or what does it need to look like?
Yeah. So I think this initial stimulus package is good news. The American people need it. Hopefully, it's going to be as efficient as possible, given to those that really truly need it, and so on and so forth.
Look at your hopefulness.
Hopefulness. You gotta hope. Gotta have hope. Optimism. I definitely think that there will likely need to be another stimulus package, most likely. As I mentioned, if we're going to hit that pause button and kind of keep people afloat, folks they're not likely to just kind of all right, doors open, just going to go skipping, and business is going to start investing left and right. There's going to likely need to be some type of stimulus package on the back end of this whole thing, truly jumpstart that recovery process that we're all looking for. There's going to need to be a strategic stimulus package to kind of really, I think, structure or really influence and facilitate increased business investment, ramping up employment, and bringing businesses back online. And so I think when we're looking at additional stimulus, it's definitely going to be one needed, I think, on the back half of this whole thing.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. So, I mean, I think there is a level of optimism there. The more money that, I kind of divert from my own philosophy on this in the way that I don't really like the government to get too involved.
Right.
But I think in this situation, it's absolutely necessary, and the more that they do. And I think the thing to note is that the global economy is in this picture as well.
Yeah.
So we're printing money. The other countries are printing money.
Yeah.
That doesn't have the same impact as if we were an isolated entity.
Right.
It's not like the recession in 2008, 2009, where we were on the proverbial island, if you will, where our economy wasn't doing as well,
right,
as others were in the world. Or at
yeah,
least
and we
they weren't
went
changing.
through not long ago where Europe was going through some really rough times, and we were skating right along.
Yeah, no, and that's the point. Is if everybody is dropping at the same rate, we're not really dropping.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I think in this instance we do have a case for everybody kind of maintaining afloat, if you will.
It's going to be a rush to contain and really
none of
capitalize.
None of this is something that we can map out efficiently. I think the government's doing the best job that they know how to do or are capable of at this point. Nobody has a roadmap. Again, we don't get into politics on this thing, but whatever side of the line you lined on, you don't have the answer.
I walk my own path.
Right.
Also, quick quick check on the LinkedIn. We have Jonathan Smith saying, "Hey Anthony, can I get a literal shout out?" Emphasis on shout. I'm not going to yell right now.
No.
Jonathan Smith, wherever you
Tell
might
him no.
be.
Tell Jonathan Smith no.
Also, what's up to Alex Sochichopoulos? I butchered that.
Yep. Probably.
James Miller, Abdel Hakim Baya. All these wonderful folks.
Yeah, hopefully everybody out there is doing well, washing their hands.
Yeah.
That'll help us get through this a lot faster too, if you all wash your hands. I think one of the things that we're going to have to, we're about to wrap up here for the week, but one of the things that I want everyone to kind of take away is this idea of day-to-day adaptation.
Yeah.
We are in an environment that is very unforeseen. If you're a carrier right now and entertaining a bid, you don't know what 3 months from now is going to look like. That shipper that's put out that bid probably doesn't have a good idea of what their next 3 months is going to look like. So the odds of you having to, become accountable for your actions today in 3 months when things start to normalize and stabilize are very high.
Yeah.
So you need to be on your toes, ready to adapt and adjust. Obviously you got to protect your own interests,
right?
But do that within reason.
Yeah.
And the way to do that is literally you're going to have to change your approach to every day. You can't just go in and do your weekly meetings anymore and say, all right, I'm done for the week.
Yeah.
I'll check back in.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a day-to-day situation. Volumes are going to go up. They're going to go down. We're going to have, right now we're watching the national volume level go down, whereas the Harrisburg market, one of the largest markets in the United States, is going up.
Yeah.
So it's not all even. It's not all at once. It was all at once in the beginning of this process in terms of freight volumes, and it was all at once with tender rejections, even more so. But that's going to come apart here in the next probably 3 to 4 weeks. I anticipate volumes to be back down to where they were at the start of this whole thing. And then, of course, that unemployment rate is really going to have a noted impact.
Yeah. One of the things that we just saw at ADP, I think they just put out their employment numbers. It was a little bit muted compared to expectations. I think the thought process with that was much of it, I think, came from the earlier part of the month. And then the other side of it is that they're analyzing payrolls. Yeah. And so with most...
It's a 2-week cycle in a lot of companies.
Yeah. And so also when we look at the payrolls, some companies keeping employees on payroll is not going to be the full extent of the whole unemployment aspect. But yeah, we got another comment. Jonathan Smith, Anthony, you have lost a viewer today. Oh, geez. Jonathan Smith. My heart it breaks. Yeah.
Where's Emila?
I don't. Oh, also shout out to Emila, the intern who runs this show and this awesome media team. That with the great leadership of Emily Zink and many others in the building. But yeah, I think that's going to take us to the end of the show. I don't know if we have a debate though. Yeah,
do you have something that you want to argue about this week? We really didn't argue that much this week.
We haven't argued in a while.
Well, we did last week. We had the whole show was an argument.
The whole show was an argument, yeah. But really, when we're looking at hot takes, I mean, I don't know because I can't. I got to take food off the table.
We'll do this. You tell me, and we'll hold each other accountable.
Yeah.
When do you think the freight market will find its bottom in volumes? I know this isn't your lane, but
I see what you did there.
Craig says April 15th. I'm saying April 30.
April 28th.
Oh, you're doing the Price is Right thing.
No, what? No. April 18th.
Okay, 3 days after Craig. All right.
Yeah. Also, we got some recommendations for a topic.
Carol Baskin.
Some Tiger King.
For those of you that watched The Tiger King, you'll know who Carol Baskin is. This is all her fault.
Yeah, did she do it?
Yeah.
Is she innocent?
If you're the Tiger King, you'll say yes, absolutely.
Yeah, which side of the camp do you fall on? James Miller says, we need to come together in this time of crisis. Yes, James Miller.
Thank you. Yeah. He's so sweet.
He is.
And he'll be the first to die. No.
No. Keep him away from Carol. Protect him at all costs.
Keep him away from Carol. And do you watch the Tiger King?
I saw a couple episodes. Yeah,
Yeah.
saw a couple episodes.
I'm on episode 4, man. That is, woo.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember his run for the presidential bid.
I understand why
yeah.
why we run into things like the coronavirus now in the
kinda
world
convenient
after watching
timing.
that show for a bit. But
Yeah.
that'll take us up to the end of the show. Thanks everybody for watching. We kind of lost track there at the end with the Tiger King, but
Content. It's good content.
good stuff. I think everybody working at home right now is binging those Netflix shows.
It's probably on in the background right now.
If
so
you want to
maybe those
get,
people.
if you want to lose some IQ points, watch some Tiger King.
Oh, geez.
I know I did, and I won't get those back, more than likely.
You never know.
Yeah.
You never know.
All right, everybody, take care out there. Anthony Smith.
Zach Strickland, it's been real.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Maybe.
Maybe not.
If you're lucky,
I don't know.
stay away from Carol.
Yeah, Carol Baskin.